for this PB cycle to go towards your project ideas. And as well, we have another 1.7+ million in next year's budget. So you can see that our commitment to this education, capacity building, and civic participation in our capital improvement program budgeting process. I just want to also recognize and thank the Department of Finance staff, Kiki and Teresa, who have put in a lot of hard work to get to this point, to make sure that we could make it as accessible as possible and reach as many people where they are, to be able to engage you in this process. That is first and foremost one of our main goals. And also a shout out and kudos to Myra and the local and national partner team that has provided amazing support along the way. You will hear from them mostly tonight, Kiki and Myra, as they are the key people doing the hard work to make this a success. And so thank you again for taking your time. You'll hear a lot of great information about how and the levels of which you can engage, but we're also interested in hearing how we can make it better for you to reach that next level of participation. I have 2 young kids. It's super helpful to be home sometimes so I can manage dinner and be on Zoom at the same time. So those ideas are very welcome as we put the choice in your hands on how to spend some dollars to build some great things in your community. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kiki.
Thank you so much, Emily. We appreciate it and appreciate all those working moms out there. So before we get too far, we want to kind of explain and make sure everyone is comfortable with participating in this meeting. Participatory budgeting is all about getting folks involved. So for tonight, we very much encourage people to communicate with us and one another using the Q&A function. You'll find that along the bottom of your screen. You can type any questions or comments you have into the box and hit send, and we'll be able to see them and respond to them. You can also reply or like other people's comments and questions using the heart or thumbs up icon in that Q&A feature. We will also be doing a couple polls and open comment questions, as well as a survey at the end of our meeting today. We want folks to get involved in the PB process, and that starts tonight. So we'll learn a little bit more about you and what you're interested in and along the way. So to participate in a poll, it should pop up on your screen. You can choose the box with your answer and hit submit. We'll be able to see some live feedback throughout the presentation. So we will get started with that right away. If you're comfortable and interested, we'd love to learn a little bit about you and share where you're from or what neighborhood you're from in the Q&A function. We will be talking a little bit about the Denver PB team that we have with us tonight. And we very much encourage you to tell us where you're joining us from. So folks should be able to open that Q&A and share their hometown, rep their neighborhood. And actually, before we get into agenda, I just want to take a moment and talk about the people that we have on our end. So we are, in addition to some city staff, myself and Emily and one of our team members, Trissa Murphy, we have worked with and contracted with a team of consultants to help make sure that this first year of Denver PB is a success. So one of the main organizations that we're working with and that you'll hear from tonight is the Participatory Budgeting Project. They are a national organization that we brought on to provide guidance and expertise about PB processes. They've worked with over 30 communities across the United States and Canada, engaged just about 500,000 people, and have helped those residents spend more than $300 million of public money. They're excited to bring PB officially to Denver, and we have a handful of team members. If y'all want to turn your cameras on and give us a wave, we have Michael Cusack here with PBP, as well as Myra Gonzalez and Roshan Bliss, who are 2 local community leaders that PBP hired to help our city with this process. You'll hear from Myra during this presentation, and Roshan is working our chat and our Q&A function, and will be helping with our discussion. Folks want to say hi, give a quick shout out.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks, Roshan. Thanks all. In addition to the Participatory Budgeting Project, we're working with Warm Cookies of the Revolution, who is a fantastic civic health club right here in Denver. Their whole business is engaging community members in civics through innovative and participatory methods. If you've seen their social media accounts, you know they go above and beyond in making what might be considered boring topics really interesting and engaging. They really focus on working with community members who have not been your typical or historical civic decision makers. And they work with residents, artists, community organizations, and the likes. So we have Joey Nika Ha here, who's with Warm Cookies, and she's going to be helping us throughout the meeting. Joey wants to give us a wave.
Hello.
Thank you, Joey. And then finally, we also have an independent evaluation team, Educe, who we've decided to work with to provide us with some independent feedback and recommendations for our PB process. As Emily mentioned, this is the first year of Denver PB. We are hoping to set a solid foundation for years of PB cycles. And so we really want to be able to learn and grow from this first year. So they'll be with us along the way and giving us ideas and advice on how we can improve our process going forward. They hope to talk with you all, people who are involved in the process. You'll be experiencing this and are the real beneficiaries of a program like this. So we hope that you'll be able to engage with them along the way so that we can really design a long-term participatory budgeting program that is successful. So Educe is based in Southwest Colorado, and they do consulting services for cities as well as healthcare providers and schools to implement programs and initiatives. And we're really excited to have them on board with us as well. So with that, I'm going to quickly cover what we're going to talk about today and then hand it over to Myra. But Myra's going to give a quick overview of how PB works, kind of why it came to Denver, how it originated. Then I'll share some details on the Denver process specifically. Myra and I will both talk about how you can get involved in the program today, as well as how you can stay involved or get involved later on in the program in some of our future phases. And then we're hoping to just take your questions and comments. So we'll save a majority of this time for that discussion and Q&A. So with that, Myra, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kiki, and welcome everybody to our first information session around participatory budgeting. This is a really exciting opportunity for a lot of us and for our communities to really get out there and, make our voices be heard and actually be able to see some of our amazing ideas and your amazing ideas, come to fruition and actually see that impact in community. And so we'll get started, with how PB works and why it matters for us. And so participatory budgeting really is a democratic process where community members like yourselves get to decide how to spend part of a public budget. As Kiki mentioned earlier, or maybe because I live and breathe PB now, there are $1.7 million on the line here that the community has a say on what that gets invested into. And so it really gives people that real power over real actual money. I know that when we were out flyering and asking folks how they would spend over $1 million, they looked at us a little puzzled, like, what are you talking about? And we're like, no, it's real. The money has been allocated. The city is behind this program, and there's money set aside for next year already. And so we'll go on to the next slide, please. But for Denver and PVP in general, it works in cycles, and really it's community resident led. So if you live in an area that has a PB process, like here in Denver, you actually get to decide how the process is going to run. And so we start with the first phase where residents design the process. We'll talk about how to get involved here shortly, but a group of residents will form a steering committee, and you actually get to write the rules around things like voting, who gets to vote, from youth, like what ages, what areas. I think the most exciting one for me in the second phase would be brainstorming ideas, coming up with things that you want to see in your community and bringing those up. The third would be to develop proposals, taking those ideas and really starting to flesh out what actual projects can look like, working with city agencies, city departments. A lot of you are really active in your community, and so you might already know some of these city staff members. You might already be plugged in with some of these city agencies, but for those of you who are not, don't fret. This will be a great way to start to get involved and to start learning those processes. But during this process, we get to learn, how much things cost, are they feasible? And then once we make sure that we have projects that can be built by the city with the funds that we have available, we're putting them on a ballot, and you guys all get to vote, your neighbors get to vote, and you get to choose what projects meet the needs of your community. And then after all of that, the city actually will build the projects. And then we start the next process again, which we already know we have funding for 2022. Next slide. So just a quick, really brief overview of PB. This process actually started in Brazil over 30 years ago. And now I know I've done a lot of research around what other cities around the world do. And it's really exciting to see that it's not just something that's happening internationally, but that there are a lot of cities, big and small here in the US, that have implemented PB. And we have a video that we want to show you all depicting what a PB process looks like in New York.
Right, if you live in this community and you pay taxes, come out and vote, decide how your tax dollars get spent.
Participatory budgeting gives people real power over real money to make the decisions that affect their lives. It's a democratic process in which ordinary community members directly decide how to spend part of a public budget.
Oh, this is different because you're actually voting for where the money is going to be spent instead of allowing them to decide where to spend the money.
Who knows better about their community than the people that live in their community?
So how does it work? First, people brainstorm ideas. They come together in neighborhood assemblies and start to think of what kinds of projects would they like to see in their neighborhood. Volunteers take people's initial ideas and turn them into real projects.
We started, we made about 40 projects, and so we had a series of budget delegate meetings, and we narrowed down the list into about 4 or 5 projects.
What are the real needs of the community? If you only have a certain amount of money, what is it that you can do that's going to benefit as many people as possible?
We're asking for a projector and 30 Mac laptops.
Displays at bus shelters throughout the district, and it will tell people when the next bus is due to arrive.
I'm dreaming of new benches, modern benches. Seniors have nowhere to go.
People get a taste of making the tough decisions and coming up with things that can be done to improve their community. And they bring them back to the public for a vote.
So we're validating every voice in our community and saying, you know what, whatever your position is, you live in our community, you have a right to decide, and that me as a representative and government should respond and should listen to that voice.
The projects with the most votes get funded.
We have the playground improvements at Millbrook Housing.
They are then implemented over the next few years, and the following year, the process starts again. People brainstorm new ideas, turn them into new projects, vote on them, and fund more improvements for their community. PB becomes part of the budget process. It becomes a new way of governing.
I think this is like the greatest wave of democracy coming into the United States. It started in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1989.
From there, it spread all over Latin America and to over 1,500 cities around the world. In Toronto, public housing tenants have decided to spend millions of dollars each year on improvements to their buildings. In Chicago and New York, city council members have set aside discretionary funds for the community to decide. In Vallejo, California, PB has been used citywide for funds from a new sales tax.
This was a great opportunity for you to be a part of government and better the city you live in. Like, who wouldn't want to take advantage of that?
We're creating a more educated platform of voters overall. So I think this can only be good for the big project of democracy.
Thank you. And we can go over to the next slide. I've watched this video many, many times, and I get really excited every single time because this is a great opportunity for our community, to embrace that community voice and actually make something of it and be responsive to it. And so there's this really great commitment between the city to our communities and to our resident leaders that with their voice, they'll actually have power over what this funding will do. And it creates that direct linkage between residents and the city. And so we're really hoping to build a stronger democracy by really embracing that community leadership, by learning and collaborating with each other, hearing what the community has to say, and being able to be proactive and respond and co-create. And then also just making sure that this process is inclusive and that we're reaching out to folks who historically have been left out of these processes to make sure that they're directly, leading the charge. They're here, they're with us, they're engaging, and that this is, a very inclusive and equitable civic process. So we'll go over to the next slide so that Kiki can tell us what PB will look like here in Denver.
Yeah, thank you so much, Myra. And I too love watching that video. It's fun to see something in action, and hopefully this time next year, we'll have our own Denver video to be able to share with folks. Hopefully with many of you being our leaders and our participants. So you have heard that there's $1.7 million for neighborhood improvements for this first cycle of PB, as well as another $1.7 million for our next cycle. In this first year, we have kind of a two-part approach to how that money will be spent out in communities. $1 million of that $1.7 million will be for projects within our completed neighborhood planning areas. Now, this is kind of a technical city thing, but based on the comments that people have shared, we have many residents who are tuning in from these neighborhoods. It's places like Montbello, Green Valley Ranch, Gateway. It's East Central Denver, our Cap Hill and North Cap Hill neighborhoods, as well as Congress Park, Cheeseman, and our East neighborhoods, East Colfax, Montclair, Hale, South Park Hill. We decided that $1 million of the program would be focused in these areas because residents of these communities have very recently participated in pretty robust outreach processes to tell the city what they would like their communities to look like going into the future. We know there's a lot of great potential ideas that came out of these plans, and we're hoping that through the PB process, that can be a good jumping off board for people to generate additional ideas and then actually implement, actually build some of those ideas that were discussed. We know that city processes don't always move very fast, and it can be hard and challenging to come up with great ideas and then have to wait a couple years to actually see those projects become real. So we're hoping that by focusing on these regions, we'll be able to deliver on communities' ideas pretty immediately. But the other side of our first cycle of PB, $700,000 will be for projects anywhere across the city, most likely that really address mobility safety. So things like crosswalks or bike lanes, sidewalks or signals. But we're really curious to hear what safety means to the people of Denver. How we can help enhance, our pedestrian experience anywhere across the city. So while we have this structure set, kind of these parameters, the community steering committee that Myra touched on and that we'll get onto a little bit later will really help build out the complete, distribution of funds and the plan for how this money is implemented. But essentially, for this first year, we'll be looking at these two approaches. As I mentioned earlier, we have this independent evaluator. Because it's our first year, we're hoping to see how these two kind of processes go. If this regional approach is really successful by putting a lot of funds towards certain neighborhoods, or if residents seem to resonate more with a citywide approach, that $700,000 worth of money. The second cycle of Denver PB, I don't think we know for sure if it's going to follow this exact same structure, if we'll focus one way or another, but we're really excited to be able to kind of try out both of these regional approaches. You'll also notice in the materials we've shared and on the website, we talk a lot about neighborhood improvements, and that relates to the kind of funding that we have, where that $1.7 million can go in our city. And the $1.7 million is capital funds or infrastructure funds. Infrastructure is a really kind of bland, big word for kind of the bones of a city, what really makes up Denver. And whether we realize it or not, we all use infrastructure every single day to get through our days, to really experience the city that we all know and love. Infrastructure can mean things like community spaces, it's our libraries and open plazas. It's the roads that we travel, sidewalks we walk, our bike lanes. It's those signals and crosswalks I mentioned. Infrastructure is our outdoor environment with parks, trails, basketball courts. It's also our environment. This is kind of in the last 10, 20 years, a really big, important part of infrastructure that I think we're all starting to really try and emphasize. You know, the different parts of our city that make sure that, you know, we have a climate and environment that will support future generations of Denver residents. Things like our tree canopy, charging stations, solar panels, all of that is kind of environmentally sustainable infrastructure. But it's also kind of the heart and soul of a city. So the public art that we have, murals. I know we had some residents on here from the Colfax area or kind of 5 Points, some of the beautiful murals we have and sculptures around town. That's also infrastructure too. So in this first year, Denver PB, the $1.7 million that residents decide how to spend can go towards these types of projects. Now, we'll talk a lot about some examples of this infrastructure, but it's really our hope that our community owns this process and that you kind of push the boundaries of what this means and really come up with some great project ideas to benefit your communities. So these are kind of generally what we talk about when it comes to infrastructure, but really looking to this group and all those who participate in the program to find some kind of creative and innovative ideas to improve our community. So with that, you know, we had a lot of responses in the Q&A so far to neighborhoods, a lot of Green Valley Ranch on the call, some City Park folks, North Park Hill. Thank you all. Glad we've got a group of people kind of citywide. We'd love you to take to the polling now and tell us, you know, what types of infrastructure you're most interested in. So it's going to be back to those icons that I shared. You can select community spaces, transportation, parks and recreation, public art, or the environment. So feel free to take a moment and choose your answer. And we recognize that all of these are important. We hear a lot when we go to the community, like, oh, well, you can't pick one. These are all related and they're all important. And we completely agree with you. Part of the process of PB and part of the process of budgeting for a major city is being able to prioritize and understand trade-offs. And so our residents will get to kind of experience that firsthand and do that problem solving of being able to decide what is most important to them.
Hey, Kiki, I wonder, can I just get in real fast while we give people one more second to do the poll?
Please.
Tell you that you're sharing your whole screen. So instead of just the slides, so we're seeing the poll live, which is really cool. But we're also seeing your buttons. And if you just stop share and reshare and just share the window from the screen, from the slide, that will fix it.
Thank you, Roshan. How about now?
I'm still seeing your buttons and the poll.
Let's see. This is like if you have something in your teeth and nobody tells you. So thank you for telling me.
You're welcome. But I think if you just go back and share from the slide deck, that should be.
Okay, one more time. How about now? Or still an issue?
I'm seeing the buttons, but I don't think it's a problem.
Okay, sorry, let me do one.
Don't let me get things confused.
No, that's fine. I want to also, some of this text is small, so I certainly want to make sure that folks are able to see it as big as possible. Okay.
Eureka.
Yes, okay, thank you. Please let me know if that happens again. I wonder if as I'm clicking through or the video, if it causes it to change. So thank you, and we gave everybody a nice hefty moment to be able to weigh in as we did a little bit of tech wrangling. So I don't know if we're able to display the polls. I think when I share it this way, I can't see it, but I'm happy to read out. It looks like transportation was a big, people were very interested in transportation projects as well as the environment. About 45% of people who took our little poll said that they're very interested in transportation projects, followed by 27% being interested in the environment, 15% in public art, and 9% in community spaces, and 3% in parks. So this is great. This is obviously just an example. We're just interested in kind of taking the temperature, seeing what you're interested in. But if you continue on this PB journey with us, you'll be able to do some actual voting and proposing of ideas for these kinds of things. So thank you all for taking that poll. Myra touched on this a little bit, talking about some of the benefits of PB, and what we're really kind of most excited about is a process that will be inclusive and accessible and equitable across our city. We've seen, research and studies from other cities. Michael and the Participatory Budgeting Project have been able to share with us the successes that places like New York and Seattle have seen. And what's really exciting is that PB processes have been better and easier ways for residents to get involved, particularly residents who haven't, have faced the highest barriers to getting involved into civic engagement previously. We know that some communities have faced higher barriers and that some communities have a history of being purposefully excluded from processes. So we are doing everything we can to make sure that we are really elevating voices and making sure we have access to this process. For this first year, we're particularly interested in making sure that we're able to connect with our Black, Indigenous, and people of color, our BIPOC communities, immigrants and refugees, persons with disabilities, and our youth. Across the board, these kinds of communities haven't had the easiest access. So we are committed to implementing things like, the captioning and ASL that we have here today. Language justice, like you heard from Olga, is important and something we're committed to making sure we have throughout the program. We're also, as you'll hear here in a few moments, going to be paying folks for their time. Your time is valuable, and some of our community members that might have a great perspective on this program don't always have the time and access to participate in something if there isn't compensation. So we'll talk about the ways that we're going to be paying people for their time. We also know that things like childcare, transportation support, and having flexible meeting times are important as well. So this is what we're thinking about so far, but we are really interested in learning from you and trying to be responsive to any needs that you may have. I know some people on the line today are experts in community engagement. So if you want to take to the chat again or to the Q&A, if there's something else that you think this program should be focusing on to make it a truly accessible and inclusive process, we would love to hear it. So feel free to share it in the Q&A. You can also send it to us on the website at the end of this meeting, and we'll give some details about how that will work. But we want to hear from you how this can be an accessible process. So with that, I'm going to touch on timeline, kind of what our next steps are. We are here, a little star in that far corner of your screen. We are at the very beginning of our PB process. And as Myra mentioned, it begins with our community steering committee and our mini grant selection. We want to have our steering committee in place so that they can really set a lot of the rules and help us decide some of these big picture questions. So we'll be kind of designing the process in January. The applications, as we'll talk about, close on December 6th. We'll take a few weeks to make our selections and get some meetings scheduled. And we plan to do this design and rule setting throughout January and into early February. At that point, the PB process will really hit the public. We'll be going out to residents and asking for ideas, doing activities with them to generate interest and brainstorming so that we can then take those ideas and concepts and really start developing proposals out of them. That proposal development process will kind of be mid-spring, March and April, And then the most exciting part, people will get to vote on projects in May or June. So as we mentioned on the slide talking about neighborhood improvements, we want people to be able to see kind of their vote and their voice in action as quickly as possible. So depending on the scale of these projects, residents will be able to see these going into the ground or being built as early as end of 2022. So I'm going to take another poll here. Of these processes, you've heard Myra describe them. You kind of see the timeline for how this rolls out. We're interested in knowing if one of these phases in particular really stands out to you. Are you most interested in the idea of, designing and setting the rules, kind of getting in on the ground floor? Or are you very interested in brainstorming ideas, getting out with your community and really doing some visioning, talking about what could be with PB? Are you more technical? Do you want to get down into the weeds and develop some specific proposals, work with people on cost estimates? Or are you out there are you excited to vote? Do you want to get to the end and actually be able to cast a ballot on some projects that the city will build? So people want to take that poll. It should hopefully be up on your screen, and hopefully you're not seeing every detail on my screens. And so far it's looking like people are pretty interested in designing the process, which is great because we hope everybody on this call has applied for a mini grant or to be on the community steering committee. People are also seeming very interested in developing proposals. So we've got some detail-oriented folks here tonight, which is great. And it looks like brainstorming is also kind of coming in third. So people are, as I would hope, really excited in the process. Obviously, we're excited to get these projects in the ground, but PB is really about, I think, the process of getting involved. And it seems like folks on this call tonight are agreeing with us. Now, Rashawn and team, are people able to see the polls, or are we able to share those results live?
You have to end the poll and then share results.
All right, let's see if that worked. Folks see we've got developed proposals at 35%. It was our winner, followed by designing the process at 29%. Great. So getting into the details of our process and the different phases, Myra and I are both going to talk a little bit about how people can get involved. So Community Steering Committee, the CSC that we've mentioned, this is really the group that will help stand the Denver PB process up. They're going to be designing the rules for the process. What I often describe as an example of this comes to who can vote. So we know that in the US, there are voting ages and voting restrictions. But one of the great things about Denver PB is that's not the case, where our community steering committee is able to decide, who can get involved and cast a ballot for projects. So they can set, an age limit that is lower than what we see for kind of formal voting processes. We certainly hope that our youth will be involved in this process. We know that, looking at kind of voting records nationwide, that younger people are less likely to get out and vote in elections than some of our older adults. So we're hoping that this could be a great example and opportunity for young people to get excited about voting. So maybe the Community Steering Committee would set an age of 15 or 16 for who can vote. As I talked about with the distribution of funds going to the neighborhood planning areas as well as citywide, there's a lot of decisions that this community or this committee would set relating to that. Are people citywide able to vote on all of the projects, or do we want, some of the regional funds to kind of be decided just by people of those neighborhoods? So we've got kind of some lines drawn, but this community steering committee would really kind of fill out the bigger picture of what Denver PB looks like. In terms of commitments, the community steering committee will meet throughout the entire program. So that timeline that we touched on, they're going to be involved kind of from beginning to end. We're really looking to this committee to be ambassadors for the program. In addition to helping set the rules, we'd love for them to get out and encourage their communities to get involved, really kind of spread the word about PB. Folks will be compensated Residents who are on this committee can earn up to $700 for their time, and we expect the commitment to be a couple hours a month. We are hoping to look to members who are on this committee to discuss how meetings will work, if they're going to be in person or virtual or a mixture, but that's kind of at a high level, some of the commitments that we'd see from the Community Steering Committee. Another way that people can get involved, oops, I apologize, here's those details on $700 for committee members and some of the hours we're looking at. Over the full 6 months of the program, it'd be about 15 to 20 hours. Then I also want to touch on our mini grant program. There are some residents out there who I think are less interested in getting down in those weeds and more interested in really activating their community, getting other people involved, bringing folks into the process. And we really hope that those people or organizations apply for a mini grant. These mini grants, we're hoping that we're able to especially connect with some of those populations that we talked about, our BIPOC communities, our immigrant and refugee residents, those who may not have been invited or feel comfortable involving and getting involved in civic processes before. So people who apply for mini grants or organizations who apply, it's really to spread the word about PB and also to help bring the process to community members. So what are interesting and creative ways that we can bring, government process to neighborhoods that might not be comfortable or interested in kind of entering those formal government roles. So the mini grant processes will be distributed in 2 ways. If you're an organization, you're able to apply for up to $7,000, and we would hope that you would work with us throughout the program. These organizations, things like nonprofits or grassroots organizations or kind of formal community groups. But then we have money reserved as well for kind of small informal groups. There's a couple of friends or neighbors who have ideas about how to really activate their community, or if there's individuals that really want to hit the ground and bring people into the process. Those individuals and small groups can receive up to $1,000 for mini grants. Both of these processes for the individuals and for the Community Steering Committee, those applications close on December 6th. So we encourage everybody to head to the website and fill out the application. We have a couple screenshots here. It's very simple. We have a handful of demographic questions because it's really important to us that our leadership committees do represent our diverse neighborhoods and that we are making sure that we have voices from a variety of backgrounds. So there'll be demographic questions on that Community Steering Committee application. And then it's just 4 questions about why you want to be in this process, what equity means to you, how you think you can really help your community. The mini grants application is similar. We're interested in knowing, who you think you can get excited about Denver PB, who you've worked with in the past, and what you think you would do with the funds if you were to be awarded a mini grant. So we'll take questions on these processes in just a few minutes here at the end of our discussion. But I'm going to let Myra also touch on how residents can get involved later in the process if you don't think a mini grant or this Community Steering Committee is for you.
Thank you. So we'll be talking about roles within the subsequent phases. And so really that idea collection phase, that proposal development phase, and that vote phase. So really there's a role for everybody in our community. If you want to step up and adopt one of these leadership roles from the beginning, you are more than welcome. And please, we highly encourage you to do so, but we will have additional roles coming up as the PB cycle progresses. But really, all of these opportunities are open to everybody in the community. I saw folks asking questions around documentation status. These are folks that live in our communities, they're working in our communities, and they're interacting with us, they're our neighbors. And we want to make sure that this process is open and available to them as well. And so we'll go over to the next slide. But one of the other roles, so if steering committee, that leadership role isn't something that you're too interested in, but you're more so excited about the ideas and making sure that you're supporting the creation of these proposals, we have a role for budget delegates. And these are folks from our communities, they're volunteers who will be out there, researching what the ideas are, what the projects could look like. They're going to be working in concert with the different city staff members, the different agencies, to make sure that the projects that are developed are feasible, that we can build them, and that the funds, that we have will get us there. But really, the job of the budget delegate is to make sure that we have feasible projects that meet the needs of our community, and that we're able to get those ideas to projects, to the ballots to go up for a vote. Next slide, please. And so really, we'll go back. We can go back and keep talking. But that is one of those other bigger leadership roles. But again, folks are encouraged. We really want you to help us reach out to individuals, make sure that everybody is participating in the idea collection phase. It doesn't matter what age they are. As we're doing our community engagement, we've spoken to young people, really, really young people, and they have amazing ideas around things that they want to see in their communities, everything from amenities to what street safety can look like, and that would be helpful for them. And so really, no idea is too small and no idea is too big. That's why we'll have an amazing team of budget delegates and of city staff members to help us get to those feasible projects. We're really going to need a lot of support around the voting phase. We'll have a Get Out the Vote campaign, really making sure that residents are going out to vote for the projects that are going to best meet the needs of their communities. And so all of these phases are going to be highly community engagement intensive. We really want to make sure that we're talking to folks and that folks are really plugged in at every single phase of the process, making sure that they're sharing with us and that they're actually shaping what the projects can look like for their communities. And so there are many roles. We hope that you'll stick with us, that you'll apply for any of them, or you'll continue, no big deal. You'll continue to come back and share your ideas with us. But now we want to open the floor to the Q&A, ask your questions, and you can do that by, again, selecting the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Type in your questions into the box, clicking send. A lot of you have been sending questions your way. And, you can like the questions, you review those responses. But yeah, let's hear those questions.
Yeah, thank you, Myra. And it looks like we have a lot in the chat. Roshan will help us kind of facilitate, but right off the bat, you had mentioned that we got a couple of questions about kind of those neighborhood planning areas. And I know we've responded in the chat, but since we got a couple, I'll address it as well. We heard from people, just if I'm not in one of those neighborhood planning areas, am I not eligible to participate? Can I not participate? The answer is no. We still would love you to be part of the Denver PD process. And that's why we have kind of this citywide approach for the funds as well. Those $700,000 can be dispersed anywhere across the city. And I think we're still looking for residents who'd be interested in serving on the community steering committee who are outside of these neighborhoods. And so I think there's still a variety of ways for folks to get involved and to vote on projects to benefit their communities. I think someone asked about University Hills. Yep, that's $700,000. So that could go to those neighborhoods. So we encourage folks all across Denver to apply and to participate in this process. Anything else, Roshan, that's come up several times in the Q&A that we should cover right off the bat? You might be muted.
Many apologies, y'all. Balancing many things. I've seen a couple questions that are just about the timeline of both the mini grants, which is an answer that I actually don't know myself. When will we disperse the mini grants is a question that I'm not sure how to answer. But there's actually been a diverse set of questions that are not there. I don't see a bunch of repeats so far.
Okay, great. Well, in terms of dispersing mini grants, that is a good one. We are, so as I mentioned, it's a little complicated, but if you are an organization, kind of a formal organization, a nonprofit, a grassroots group, a community organization, and if you apply for one of those up to $7,000 mini grants, that application is due by December 6th. We'll take a couple of weeks to review all the applications and decide who will be awarded those funds. So we are planning for at least kind of 4 weeks after December 6th, so early 2021, most likely, those awards will be made. We've heard from a lot of our community organizations that the reimbursement method just doesn't work. You know, they are not able to spend the funds upfront, that they need that money at the beginning of their process or their program so they can actually implement what they said they're going to do. So we want to be as responsive as we can to that. And we're still fine tuning the exact details, but I believe, you know, at least 50 to 75% of the awarded funds will be delivered to nonprofits, you know, right around that, right after they're awarded. Individuals will be awarding those mini grants on a rolling basis. And we understand that an individual with $1,000 isn't going to be able to participate the whole program. So someone might apply for a mini grant just for the brainstorming portion of the program, or just for the, you know, get out the vote portion of the program. Because these are smaller funds, the vast majority of that $1,000 would be awarded to residents right away, right after that award is made. For those that'll be awarded on a rolling basis, it'll be a less time, but probably a week or two after the application is received that those awards are made. So hopefully that helps a little bit in terms of timeline of mini grants.
And Kiki, I know there's somebody asking if the mini grant funds will come from the $1.7 million. Can you also help clarify that? Because I know at the beginning I asked the same question, and so I really like this response.
Yes, no, thank you. That is a great question. And no, the $1.7 million is just for projects. So the city of Denver does have additional funds set aside, and that's how we're working with the amazing Participatory Budgeting Project and Warm Cookies. And that's also where the compensation for speakers will come from, as well as the mini grants. So $1.7 million is exactly what residents will get to spend. We are not touching that.
And then there's another question. Is there a fixed number of organizational mini grants that are available?
That is a great question. We have behind the scenes kind of a division of how much money we think will go to organizations, kind of those formal groups, and how much will be reserved for individuals. A lot of it, though, will depend on the amount that organizations request. If we get organizations requesting that full $7,000 amount, it'll be fewer. But if we have kind of a mix of some folks asking for less than that $7,000 amount. But in general, I think we're looking at awarding, you know, between 3 and 6 organizations. So it'll be a smaller group that we hope will be able to work with us throughout the program.
And then can you also let us know where folks can find links for the Community Steering Committee and for the mini grant applications? Where can folks go to find those?
Yes, thank you. That is a great question. And hopefully we're able to post in the chat. I will try and do this as well, but multitasking is not one of my strong suits. But you can go, the easiest website is denvergov.org/DenverPB. That's a city webpage. And right at the top, you'll be able to click in. There's an option to join PB and help lead PB. If you click in there, you'll get onto our engagement software. This is kind of a cool website that allows you to do the surveys right on the site. Eventually, people might be able to vote on the site. You'll find on that website that there's a place for people to leave project ideas. If you already have something in mind, if you're one of those people that said your favorite phase is brainstorming projects and you have some in mind, you're able to share project ideas on kind of a community bulletin board sort of thing. But on that page, you'll find the options for the Community Steering Committee, as well as the community mini grants. The site is fully translatable. So if you're able to use the translate widget, often in the top right corner of the screen, all of the text should be displayed in the language of your choice as well. But we'll make sure to post that in the chat so people have access to it right away. And I did also see, as I was skimming through, attempting to post a chat, so I'm bad at multitasking. I already got distracted, and I want to take another question that I saw come up about our undocumented residents. And I'm sure a lot of this came up because, we're talking about hoping to work with immigrants and refugees. So yes, we certainly want our undocumented residents to apply, and we'll make sure that we have kind of safe and accessible spaces for them to do that, and make sure that they feel that their data and their privacy and information is protected throughout this program. We are also working with the city teams to make sure we're still able to compensate any residents who might be undocumented. So we're hoping that if you are undocumented, or if you know of organizations or individuals that are undocumented that are thinking about applying, let them know that we're here to work with them and make sure that this process makes sense and is something they feel comfortable doing. You'll find on the website, there's also a questions box. And in some of the content, Myra has her website or her email as well. Mm-hmm. Folks are able to reach out. I mean, Myra, I'll let you mention that. People can reach out to us if they have questions or if they're nervous about anything or concerned. But we really do hope that any undocumented residents feel like this is a place where they can really participate and have their voice heard.
Thanks so much, Kiki. I saw one question in the chat that asked about, can you say more about the definition of mobility safety for the folks who are not in these 3 NPIs that are the citywide kind of eligibility?
Yes, thank you. It's a great question. Us city people often get caught up in our own jargon and language. We need people to check us on it. So mobility safety is, it sounds, I think, more specific than we really intend it to be. Really, anybody who is walking or rolling or somehow moving throughout our city, we want those folks to get around efficiently and safely. So some of the features, and that's what we think these funds would help support. The reason we are focusing on this mobility safety category is because often our networks, our bike networks, our sidewalk networks, even if it's something happening in one neighborhood, these types of projects are really part of a larger network. And Denver is not going to work at its best unless we have these complete networks. So that was the rationale behind looking at mobility safety. And everybody, as a bare minimum, deserves to be able to move around easily and safely. So some of those easy projects that kind of pop into your mind right away are things like light signals or crosswalk signs. We call them hawk signs, and I'm sure many of you have seen them throughout the community. It's not a full red, yellow, green stoplight, but it's a button that pedestrians can push. It should slow traffic and people can cross those busy corridors. That's kind of a really specific example of mobility safety, but it's also things like crosswalks and ramps. You know, many of our residents who use wheelchairs don't have the best access, to get from A to B because we are lacking ramps across the city. Or if we think about our school kids, any mom with a stroller, what do those communities need so that they can safely take their children to school? If we look into our parks as well, we know there's a lot of paths connecting parks and over rivers and railways. So anything that we can help to make people safely be able to utilize their park systems, that's all kind of within that mobility safety realm. So we hope that having this kind of direction isn't limiting. We certainly want to hear ideas that community has for that citywide pot of funds. But that was sort of our general idea in having mobility safety as a focus. And speaking of that, I'll mention I saw another question here, slightly related, but it's talking about which departments a budget delegate might get to work with. And I think that's a great question. I know we had an answer for it, but I think it's a good moment to flag that many agencies across the city, I think we have representation from about 12 city agencies involved in Denver PD. So budget delegates will often work with some of our implementation agencies, people like the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, or DOTI, for those of you who love city acronyms. We have lots of representatives from our Transportation Infrastructure Department who are ready and gearing up to work with residents and the steering committee to say, okay, if you want, a better crosswalk or better bus shelters, what is that going to cost? I want to note that the staff, the city staff that residents would work with, they're listening to community members and to residents, not the other way around. So they're there to kind of be a sounding board and help with some of those kind of cost estimates and whatnot, but they're really ready to be responsive to the ideas that our community has. So we have those folks on board who residents will be able to work with, our parks team, our housing team. Housing is infrastructure, and we've got city staff from the housing department that are ready to work with residents. But we also have some kind of equity and engagement folks who are on board as well. We've got some members in the transportation office whose bread and butter is community engagement. They're on this call right now, and we're appreciative to have them with us already. They'll be engaged throughout the program. The Office of Social Equity and Engagement has been a key agency, and they'll continue to work with residents. When we decide what to fund and where projects go, when the city is doing that decision making, we have kind of a process and some steps in place to make sure that those decisions are equitable, or that they won't be impacting certain communities inadvertently or on accident. We'll have some experts from the Social Equity Office to work with residents to make sure that they're thinking about those things too when they're developing proposals. So you'll get a full city team if you're a budget delegate.
And then there was a question that kind of ties in with that as well. And basically, I'm not finding the direct wording, but how will the projects that come out of the PB process relate to the projects already in the pipeline from agencies like DOTI, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure?
Yes, nope, that's a really, really good question. And it's coming from someone who I'm sure has done a lot of great work advocating for their communities and for projects already, because yes, we have a lot of lists at the city of projects that are in the pipeline. I'll just take one example because it's somewhat relevant right now. We have bond programs, general obligation bond programs that voters approve. So just this November, voters approved $260 million worth of bonds to support projects, infrastructure projects, these kinds of neighborhood improvements. Bond programs are 10 years and they're designed that way for a lot of reasons. But for this most recent bond that was approved, there's over 80 distinct projects that will be funded with that $260 million. I'll take just one example. Morrison Road is a major corridor. It's a real community road. It's I don't know if we had any residents from the Westwood neighborhood here, but it's really a community hub. And there's a lot of great cultural and artistic businesses along that route. And the route has been worked on for quite a while. The previous bond had money for it, and this new bond that was just approved has money for it as well. So that's an example of a project that is in the pipeline. If, for example, we had a resident from the Westwood neighborhood that said, hey, I want to improve Morrison Road, during that proposal development phase, we would work with residents and give that background and say, you know what, it is, here's what it's covering. It's possible that a resident would still think that there's something that the current project doesn't cover and that we should put more funds towards it. But we'd provide that background for residents and let them know that, yep, we'll, as much as we can, we'll get a timeline for when that project would be completed. We'll also try and get a list of all the projects that we have across the city that are being funded. It's lengthy and not the easiest thing to read through. So I think that budget proposal phase is really the part where we'll be able to make sure we're not having any redundancies, but we will put a list out that shows all the projects that are kind of in process or have funds committed to them. So residents have that right at the beginning and don't kind of waste time on something that, is going to be constructed in a couple months or something like that. So that's a great question.
And then I'm seeing another one asking, is PB all online?
That is something that we've been thinking a lot about. Obviously, the health and safety of our community is top priority here in Denver. And as much as I wish that the pandemic was something in our past, it continues to kind of rear its head and pose challenges. So we're really going to make sure that at a bare minimum, we are adhering to kind of the public health orders that our city has in place and that our state has in place. We'll look to, public health experts and make sure that if we're having meetings or anything like that, we are doing that in a safe way. But this is one of those things that our community steering committee would really help us decide. After we have a group of members selected, We'd have a collaboration with them to decide how are their meetings going to be hosted. Are they going to be virtual, in person, or a hybrid? After that is determined, as we continue to move through the PB process, we'll make those same decisions and we'll look to that leadership committee, that leadership group, to decide, how should budget delegation meetings be decided? Are those in person or virtual or both? It's certainly a bit of a clunky process, but it's something we've all gotten, I think, used to nowadays. And I wouldn't be surprised if hybrid is something that we decide on, but we're going to reserve that decision for the community steering committee.
And then I want to kick over another question from the Q&A over to Rashawn to help us answer this, since Rashawn helped lead the Auraria campus PB a while ago. But the question is, once a mini grant proposal is submitted, how can one access a copy to review and modify the document? I think it'd be helpful to talk a little bit more in detail around the proposal development process.
Well, so I think I'm seeing this question from Jay as well. And I can answer the question about how, when an idea is submitted, how it changes. But if it's specifically about the mini grant proposal, then I would suggest that actually, I think it's recommended that you save your mini grant application on your own computer before you actually submit it, because I'm not sure that you can modify the application for a mini grant after the application. But if we're just talking about, I want to put an idea in for a playground at my local park, and then you think later, oh, no, it's actually really important that it's a gold playground and not green and not blue, then there are a couple ways that you can be involved in shaping that process. But I'll just start by saying, like, it's not guaranteed. It's actually a democratic process, and folks will work together to come to a sort of shared agreement. But what happens is that once you have put in an idea that you want to be funded, you can actually join what's called the Budget Delegate Committee. And that's the set of people who basically work directly with the city and other folks who are engaged in actually turning these raw ideas that are sometimes on the back of an envelope or a scrap of paper into a formal project proposal that has a real accurate price tag and a timeline. And so if you really cared about that playground and wanted to make sure that you were part of helping shape it, you should submit an idea and then also apply to be a budget delegate, because that is how you're going to get the most involved in actually taking your ideas from raw idea to budgeted and priced out proposal that's on the ballot. Did I answer your question?
And then there's a question that asks, how did the city and county of Denver decide to explore the PB process?
Thank you for that. It's fun to kind of look back and think about how we got here. So believe it or not, the Denver PB process started about 3 or 4 years ago. So this has been long coming. It was kind of an acorn of an idea. And a lot of credit goes to our elected officials. Councilwoman Kniech was a really strong advocate. She's one of our at-large city council members here in Denver. She's been a very strong advocate for a PB process, as well as a lot of our community activists. Warm Cookies has long been encouraging the city to get involved with the process and has been working with the councilwoman to find ways that we can really bring this to life. It was important to us that we found a funding source that people could actually get their hands on. So that was a big part of the development of the process. And I think when we decided to officially kind of move into PB, it was just after one of our general obligation bond processes. This was the vote from 2017, if folks can remember back that far. We had done a pretty thorough community outreach process where we went to communities and we had comment cards and we asked for project ideas from residents to put on this bond. We received about 4,000 comments from residents on projects they wanted to see. many of which made it onto the bond documents and the ballots that people then got to vote on in a formal election. But there was still a bit of a disconnect and a miss between people voting on an actual project and it getting delivered. A GEO bond, it sets kind of the purposes or the categories of projects that'll get funded, and there's some specific projects in there, but we really wanted to take it one step forward further and allow residents to, actually be the decision makers for their taxpayer dollars. So this is certainly a small amount of funds for now, 1.7 million, but we're hoping that that pot only continues to grow. And we have so many great community engagement opportunities across the city. Agencies are doing really great work to hear community feedback. So we also hope that this PB process starts to spread into some of our other existing outreach processes. So I think it's kind of growing slowly, but we're really excited to be here today with the funds in hand, ready to release them for our community to be the deciders. I did see a question about the $700, and this made me think of another question I saw about mini grants. So somebody asked, $700 might not be enough, to really kind of be worth the time, and it's possible they can make that money or more elsewhere. And I think that's really important feedback. As I mentioned, we are hoping to improve this process as we keep going forward. So hearing that is useful for us. This year, that will be kind of the amount that residents will be able to make on the committee. It was our hope that with the commitments, the hour commitments that we're looking at, kind of those 15 to 20 hours over 6 months, that people would be making at least $15 an hour through this process. But we'll definitely take that to heart and make sure that we're kind of keeping an eye on the compensation this time around and seeing if it does seem to be enough, or if we really need to look at our process in future years and find a way to carve out more funds for that compensation of committee members. On the mini grant side, I've seen a question about reporting. A lot of our organizations are stretched really thin, and the amount of money for a mini grant isn't, it's not gonna, not oodles and oodles of money. And sometimes organizations have experienced that the reporting requirements are just, it bogs these organizations down too much, and it can make it kind of not worth it to get involved. I've heard this feedback from Warm Cookies and from the Participatory Budgeting Project. They've said the same things that you're saying. We have to make these processes as easy as possible, not too burdensome, try and cut away as much red tape as we possibly can. So when it comes to tracking and reporting, we know that it's really difficult for people to measure community engagement. It's not a tactile thing. So what we're going to be working with organizations and individuals on is kind of a more conversational basis. We just want to hear what you're doing and the efforts that you're making, mostly so we can understand, what's really working and what should we continue to invest in the future. What are ideas or methods or tactics that you're employing that you feel like are having an impact in community. So we're hoping that it's a process where you'll be able to benefit, to hear from other organizations that are doing this work. We'll get an idea of what you're doing on the ground, and that it won't be kind of a formal or a cumbersome process to report and to kind of prove your impact. I'm looking to see if we have.
I do want to do a time check because we're going until 7:30, we had said to folks, but we do have an exit survey that we want to have and given time for folks to complete to help us as we move along through this process. And so I'm wondering if now is an okay time for us to switch over for that.
I think that is a great idea. And I hopefully just stopped sharing my screen so that we can make sure we have the survey, the exit survey pulled up. And I think we can do that and continue to answer a few questions. Let me see if I can successfully deploy our survey, or if, let's see, or if it might be something that we need. One moment.
Made you the host, it might help.
Let's see, we're switching around who's our host and whatnot. One more moment. And while I'm fiddling with this, are there any other questions, Myra? Maybe one that you can pitch while I'm finding our survey.
I wonder if we can say just a little bit more about what's meant by capital funds.
Yes, so essentially, I think the easiest description of capital fund is anything that kind of goes in the ground that you can touch, walk on, roll on, engage with. Oftentimes when we're talking about fund sources, and someone's got to stop me because I'm finance, so I find this stuff interesting and it's really not. We talk about capital funds and operating funds. So capital funds are those things you can touch. It's kind of what we talked about. It's our roads and streets and bridges. Operating funds are how we get those capital funds oftentimes. It's the people building roads. It's the people doing the work for, affordable housing. So we have capital budgets and operating budgets. Many cities, I'd say most cities, at least when they're starting a PB process, focus on those capital funds for a couple of reasons. I always think about it as onions and oranges. Bear with me. If you peel an orange, you know what you get. It's an orange. When you peel an onion, you get another layer and another layer and another layer. Capital funds, they're often one time and they're easier to scope and to estimate. Operating funds have a lot of layers to them because oftentimes they take staff or locations or leases to actually bring them to life. So if you were to think about this in your life, you wanted to tear up your backyard and make a basketball court, you'd have to calculate, the cost of digging up the grass, a concrete, striping, a net, but you'd be able to find a number of what that project would cost for the next 10 years. Once you pay that price, you have that completed project for 10 or so years. If you wanted to start a basketball league, all of a sudden you have different kinds of costs. Yes, you need a place to play. So you're either building a court or you're leasing space, but you have to pay a coach and referees. You have to find players, pay for uniforms. And these are costs that are going to come up again and again. And so finding kind of the final price tag for an operating project is just a little bit more complicated. It's not that it's not important or not doable, but we're starting with capital because those costs are a little bit easier for us all to wrap our heads around and to get really specific price tags for them. As I mentioned, this is the first year of PB. It's very possible that we will move towards projects that are operating, kind of things like programs and initiatives. But at least for this first year, we're looking at those capital costs, those neighborhood improvements. So hopefully that helps. And I'm glad folks allowed me to chat about funds. Now, I am still only able to see our polls, folks. So I might have to point people to our website to take our exit survey, unless someone smarter and better at technology than I am.
I can also, if you registered via our Eventbrite, we have your email addresses. And so we can send a reminder to help us by taking that survey. I can send out that email to everybody who registered. Thank you all for sticking with us. If you did not register via Eventbrite, please send me your email. We would love to stay in touch with you, make sure that you're receiving updates. My email is in the chat. I'm going to look for it to plug it in again so that it's the most recent thing on your screens. But yeah, you can expect an email from myself. Boom, multitasking right there. Expect to receive an email from myself. This webinar, the presentation, and the audio will be available to you all through the email. So if you want to maintain, go back, maybe, there's some clarification, you want to just go back, we'll send that in the email. Thank you so much, Maria. You can email me directly if you don't want to put it in the comments, but definitely send me an email. And if you signed up via Eventbrite, no worries, we have your email already. I have access to that, and I believe I'm the only one on our team that has access to that as well. And so we're, being very proactive around our privacy and who has access to what. So do not fret on that front.
Yes, thank you all so much. We're so happy that you were able to join us today. And hopefully we got through a chunk of your questions. We will make sure to go through them. And if there's questions that we hadn't answered or if we misinterpreted, we have Myra's email in there. Please feel free to email us or to leave that question on the Denver Participatory Budgeting site. And we will get back to you with those answers. You guys had a lot to say, which is fantastic. And we really hope to see you all continue to be involved in this process. I think this would be a great group to help us lead a very exciting new program here in Denver.